Shadows of the Olive House. The first time I saw the olive house, I thought it looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. The walls were made of stone the color of old bone, cracked and veined with creeping ivy. The roof sagged in places, its terracotta tiles faded into muted reds and browns. Beyond it stretched endless groves of olive trees, their twisted trunks like arthritic limbs clawing toward the sky. The whole scene seemed quiet, almost idyllic at a glance, yet underneath there was something that pressed into me, subtle but undeniable, like standing too close to a storm before it breaks. The family had asked me to stay there, to keep the property watched while they dealt with legal matters in the city. They said the house had been in their bloodline for centuries, passed down again and again until no one could truly remember the first generation who had built it. They spoke of it with pride, but also distance, as though it belonged more to the land than to them. When I entered, I understood. The air inside was cold despite the summer heat, heavy with a faint odor of oil and damp stone, like a cellar that had been closed for decades. The rooms were arranged around a central corridor that led directly to a set of double doors opening toward the grove. At night, when I stood at the threshold, I could see the olive trees shifting under the moonlight, their branches tangling together like shadows weaving a net. The silence of that grove was suffocating. Not even insects dared to break it. Only the occasional groan of branches or the soft drop of olives falling into the grass betrayed the fact that the place was alive. From the first evening, I began to feel watched. Not in the way of human surveillance, but something else, something woven into the soil and bark. The house's many windows looked out into the grove, and whenever I passed them, I had the sense of figures lingering just beyond sight, crouched between the trees. The reflections in the glass distorted the outside light, and sometimes I thought I saw shapes in them, darker than they should have been, like stains that moved when I blinked. The bedroom I had been given faced directly into the olive fields. On the first night, I woke to the sound of leaves brushing against the walls, though no tree grew close enough to touch the house. When I peered through the shutters, I saw movement, shadows sliding between the trunks, impossibly tall, their outlines elongated and thin, like bodies stretched far beyond their natural proportions. They did not move like people. Their motions were fluid, slow, bending as though boneless, swaying in rhythm with nothing. I shut the window quickly, but the image remained burned into me. When I tried to sleep again, I felt them pressing against the walls, surrounding the house as though curious about what had entered their domain. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of crushed olives, pungent and bitter, until I could taste it on my tongue. I lay awake until dawn, when the grove softened again into its deceptive tranquility. The days blurred into one another. By sunlight, the olive house seemed almost harmless, though its walls never fully warmed and its corners always seemed too dark. I would walk the grove, trying to dispel my unease, but even then I could not escape it. The trees stood close together, their branches intertwining so thickly that the sky became only fragments of blue. My footsteps sank into the dry soil, and more than once I found myself disoriented, unable to tell which direction led back. It was during one of those walks that I found the first mark. A tree near the center of the grove bore carvings into its bark, deep lines etched into rough patterns. They resembled crude human figures, little more than stick bodies with oversized heads. Dozens of them, some clustered together, some isolated, all scratched with violent pressure. The cuts bled dark resin that smelled acrid, sour like rot. My stomach churned as I touched the bark. The resin clung to my fingers, sticky, difficult to wash off, as though it wanted to stay. That night, the shadows returned. I woke to the sound of branches creaking, though the air was still. When I dared to look, The grove seemed alive with movement. The tall figures slid between the trees, their shapes blotting out the moon. They did not step, they stretched, elongated, folding themselves between the trunks like fabric caught in the wind. Sometimes they paused, leaning unnaturally close to the windows, as if examining the glass. Their faces, if faces they had, were voids darker than the night, their edges blurring into the branches. I could not close my eyes. I could not even breathe properly. Each exhale felt like it would draw their attention, and I lay frozen, every muscle screaming with tension. Hours dragged on. When dawn came, the grove stood empty again, but the impression of their watchfulness lingered, etched into the silence. The following day, I avoided the grove, but even inside the house I was not free. The walls whispered, not with voices, but with shifting sounds, as though something moved just beyond them. At times, I swore I felt the brush of leaves against my skin though I was alone indoors. The smell of olives grew stronger, rancid now, filling every breath, as though the fruit was rotting in the very air. On the sixth night, I realized the shadows were no longer staying within the grove. I woke to find my room darker than it should have been, the moonlight swallowed by something leaning against the shutters. A faint pressure pushed inward, as though a body pressed against the wood, testing its strength. My skin crawled, and before I could move, I heard it, the faint scrape of nails dragging slowly down the outside wall. The sound moved, circling the house. Not footsteps, not human, a slithering, dragging motion that seemed endless. I pressed myself into the corner of the room, covering my ears, but the vibration seeped through the walls, into the floor, into my bones. Then silence. When I finally opened the shutters at dawn, I found smears across the outer wall, dark streaks like ash rubbed into stone. The grove beyond was still. Too still. On my last night in the Olive House, I did not try to sleep. I sat by the window watching the grove. For hours, nothing stirred. The silence deepened until it felt suffocating, and then slowly the shadows emerged. Dozens of them, sliding from the trees, taller and darker than before. They gathered at the edge of the grove, all of them facing the house, their bodies bending slightly forward, waiting. One figure broke away, stretching closer, gliding across the ground until it reached the well of moonlight directly before my window. It paused, rising higher, its body stretching upward until it seemed to fill the sky. The branches bent under its height. For a moment, the entire grove was swallowed in black, as though night itself had thickened into flesh. I do not remember moving, only the sudden awareness of my own heartbeat, thunderous and wild. The figure bent closer, its head tilting unnaturally, until the void where its face should have been pressed almost against the glass. I fled before dawn. I did not pack, I did not look back. The Olive House still stands, watching the grove, its windows like blind eyes staring across the endless sea of twisted trees. But I know what waits there now. The shadows belong to the grove, and the grove belongs to them. And once you have seen them, you are never truly free again. Boy at the chapel steps. I had always thought of chapels as safe places, quiet corners of stone where one could rest beneath the watchful calm of faith. But the chapel in that Italian village was different. It was small, perched at the edge of the square like a sentinel, its weathered facade facing a road that wound into the olive hills. Its bell tower had long since fallen silent. The bronze bell cracked and tilted, covered in green lichen that made it look as though time itself had claimed it. I was asked to stay in the house beside it, a modest two-story structure with shuttered windows and walls mottled by centuries of sunlight and rain. From the upstairs window, I could see the chapel's steps directly. At first, I thought it a gift, some picturesque view into history, stone worn smooth by generations of knees and feet. But in time, I began to dread that window more than any other place in the house. The nights in the village fell thick and absolute. The roads emptied, the air grew still, and the quiet seemed to magnify every creak of the old house. Yet beyond that silence, I always felt the weight of the chapel pressing against me. It did not simply sit across the narrow road. It leaned, it hovered, as if its presence filled the space even when the moon refused to shine on it. The first time I noticed the boy was not at night, but in the bleached light of morning. I was carrying a jug of water across the room when I caught sight of him through the open shutters. He was seated on the lowest chapel step, his small frame bent forward, his hands resting on his knees. He did not move, did not even shift his gaze. His head tilted slightly downward, but I felt, instinctively, that his eyes were fixed on my window. He wore pale clothes, loose and faded, though the details seemed to blur if I stared too long. His hair was dark, unkempt, and it clung in odd strands to his forehead as though damp. I waited, expecting him to stand, to turn, to run off toward some waiting family. But he never did. He simply sat there. Hours passed, the sun shifted, and when I finally looked again, the step was empty. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard the faintest sound of footsteps outside, not the heavy tread of an adult, nor the scatter of villagers. These were small, deliberate, the rhythm of a child pacing back and forth across stone. My heart tightened with each pass. Sometimes the steps paused, lingering as though directly beneath my window, before resuming their restless circuit. When I finally dared to peek through the shutters, the chapel lay quiet and dark. The pattern repeated itself for days. By daylight, the boy would sometimes appear on the steps, always seated in the same position, motionless, silent. By night, I would hear him, though I rarely saw him. The air outside would grow colder, heavy with the mineral scent of wet stone, as though rain had fallen only on the chapel though the skies above were dry. I began to notice changes in the stone itself. The steps seemed darker each morning, as though dampness seeped up through them from beneath the earth. A fine moss crept along their edges, spreading quickly despite the heat of summer. Once, when I leaned close, I swore I saw tiny scratches etched into the lowest step, crude marks like fingernails dragged desperately across its surface. The boy's presence grew heavier. On the sixth night, I woke to the sound of knocking, not at the door, not on the shutters, but from the chapel itself. A steady, hollow sound, echoing faintly across the narrow road. It was not a knock of hands, but of something harder like bone against wood. I pressed my palms against my ears, but still the rhythm crawled into me. I thought of the chapel's door, ancient and warped, and of small fists striking it from within. The following morning, I forced myself across the road. The chapel loomed larger up close, its walls pitted with holes, its door cracked and stained with dark streaks. I placed my hand on the lowest step. The stone was ice cold, slick with a moisture that glistened in the sun. I pulled away quickly, my fingers tingling, and when I looked down, I thought I saw the faint outline of a handprint beside where mine had been, smaller, narrower, etched into the stone itself. From that day forward, I could not escape the boy. Even when he was not visible, I felt him. The air inside the house thickened at night, carrying the smell of damp earth and mildew. Shadows in the corners seemed longer, heavier, as though something stretched them outward. I would wake at odd hours with the sensation of being observed, my body prickling with awareness. One night, I heard breathing. Not my own, not the subtle creaks of the old house. It was faint, shallow, and it came from the wall near the window. I pressed myself still, heart racing. The shutters rattled slightly, though no wind stirred. And then I saw it, through the narrow slit of the shutters, a pale face pressed close to the wood, eyes dark hollows, mouth slightly open as if exhaling against the slats. I did not move. I could not. The breathing slowed, deepened, and for one horrible instant I thought it was in rhythm with my own. The days blurred after that. I no longer opened the shutters, no longer dared to step near the window. Yet even behind closed wood, I could feel the chapel across the road, its steps alive with memory. Sometimes I would wake to find dirt on the floor near the threshold of my room, fine powdery dust like that of old stone crumbling. Other times, I would hear the faint patter of bare feet running across the wooden floor below me, circling, until silence reclaimed the air. On my last night in that house, I felt him inside. Not just outside, not across the road, but within the walls. I heard the boards creak under weight too light to be an adult, moving slowly up the stairs. My body locked in terror, every muscle straining. The sound grew closer, step by step, until it stopped outside my door. The silence was unbearable. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. Then softly the handle turned. It did not open, the old iron latch held, but the pressure was unmistakable. A child's hand, testing, turning, waiting. I sat frozen in the corner until dawn broke through the cracks, painting the room in weak light. Only then did the pressure vanish. Only then did the house exhale again. I left the next morning, abandoning the house without explanation. I did not look back at the chapel, though I felt its weight upon me as I walked away. But sometimes, even now, when I close my eyes, I see him. A boy seated on ancient stone steps, head tilted, waiting with patience that outlasts lifetimes. The chapel is only his stage. The road, the village, the world, they are only places for him to follow when the time feels right. And I know he is still waiting.